Hello everyone, thank you for coming out. My name is Jeffrey Key, and I'll be presenting my capstone project on the understanding of coach-player relationships in advanced analytics in college basketball. Now before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the INDS staff, Eric Brown, Holly Codzillo, Dr. Stephen Freeland, Stephen McAlpine, Carrie Sauter, and Dr. Christopher Varlak for all their help and support throughout this process. I'd also like to acknowledge my degree mentors, Vivian Armour, Dr. Dennis Coates, and Dan Friel for their guidance and support as well. So take a second to think about what are some of the contributing factors that affect sports performance. While there are many, including diet and nutrition, strength and conditioning, and genetics, the two that I focused on were the importance of strong coach-player relationships given the high number of cases of player mistreatment at the hands of their coaches, as well as the use of advanced analytics in college basketball given the shift toward statistics to improve player performance. So my motivation to create this project stemmed from my experience as a high school basketball coach in inner city Baltimore, where I used analytics, but at the same time experienced a personal disconnect with some of my players due to the psychosocial differences in our upbringings. My purpose in creating this project was to explore the different factors that contribute to coach-player relationships and also determine the how and why coaches in college basketball are or are not using analytics within their programs. So given this, I created a portfolio that featured 4 components: a literature review that discussed the different psychosocial issues influencing urban athletes, a literature review that discussed the different coaching styles, a self-reflection paper that discussed how my understanding of the coaching profession has evolved as a result of my research and experiences, and then also a video where I discussed the different types of analytical technologies we use at UMBC and how I interpret that data. So the first step in creating this process was to get a better understanding of the different psychosocial issues that affect coach-player relationships. And so the literature suggested that the relationship is really the heart of coaching and it's the determinant of coaching success. At the same time, they say that cultural competency and a coach's ability to connect with their players and the time they invest in learning about their players outside the court is what strengthens this relationship. So the key researchers in this debate are Sophia Jewett, who explored the concepts of cultural competency, positive youth development, and the multiple roles a coach plays in the lives of their athletes. And also Tania Cassidy, who discussed coaches being socially supportive, cultural competency, and positive youth development as well. So while there are many different psychosocial issues that affect urban athletes, the 3 that I focused on were poverty, violence, and family instability, and the effect that they have on positive youth development, which is a youth's opportunities to form close-knit relationships with the adults in their communities, and also form good characteristics such as empathy, self-worth, and also just strong ethics overall. And that while I don't have time to discuss all 3 issues, I did want to highlight poverty, and the reason why is because 43% of urban youth in America deal with poverty, and also 32.2% of urban youth in Baltimore deal with poverty as well. And that's important because, like I said, when I was coaching high school basketball, all the players were from urban Baltimore communities, and that could be a demographic of athlete that I work with in the future. And so oftentimes poverty can lead to increased stress and increased depression rates. And this increased stress and depression can lead to high violent tendencies and low academic achievement as well. So my second literature review focused on the different types of coaching styles, which experts suggest are autonomy supportive coaches and also controlling coaches. Experts also say that controlling coaching methods have kind of been outdated and replaced by autonomy supportive methods, and the reason why is because the personalities and the demands that athletes nowadays have are much different from the ones they had back in the day. So for example, back in the day, players were a little bit more receptive to getting cursed at and maybe verbally abused, and they kind of just took it, whereas nowadays players are quick to pull the trigger and transfer or check out emotionally or report their coaches for that type of behavior. So the key researchers in this debate were Mike Marcone, who discussed the topics of autonomy supportive coaching, intrinsic motivation, and emotional availability, and also Ryan Flett, who discussed the issues of controlling coaches and also fear tactics like intimidation and humiliation and the effect that they have on athletes. So autonomy supportive coaches are ones that create inclusive environments. They care a lot about building that relationship and rapport with their players. They're also very empowering and are very, very emotionally supportive as well. But on the flip side, controlling coaches are kind of like drill sergeants in a way. They're very authoritative. They care very little, if at all, about developing that relationship with their player outside the court. And they can also be very harsh in the sense where they can be verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, and in some cases physically abusive as well. So former NC State coach Jim Valvano was a prime example of an autonomy supportive coach. He was someone who was very socially supportive of his athletes. He also liked to empower his athletes as well. So an example of this is he sometimes allowed his players to give halftime speeches, which is something I've never seen in a head coach. And also he used to incorporate his players' feedback into their game planning. On the flip side, former Indiana head coach Bob Knight is probably the most famous college basketball coach who resembles that of a controlling one. He was someone who was very, very verbally, emotionally, and physically abusive. If players weren't playing up to par, he would kick them or hit them or choke them in some situations. He was fired from Indiana after a video which revealed that he choked one of his players. And also he liked to humiliate his players as well. He called them out in the media to kind of like rile them up and trigger them emotionally. So my last study of focus was advanced analytics in college basketball. So while there's been a huge shift towards analytics, the debate is between coaches who use it heavily, coaches who use it in moderation, and then coaches who use it or not at all, coaches who don't use it at all. The key researchers in this debate were Kerry Miller, who was a college basketball analyst for Bleacher Report. In his literature, he discussed how data analytics are revolutionizing college basketball. And then also Jeff Goodman, who is a college basketball insider for ESPN. He interviewed dozens and dozens of head coaches about the pros and cons of taking that analytical approach. So the pros of using analytics, according to coaches, general managers, and different statisticians and experts, is that coaches are able to track numbers that were previously unmeasured, right? And based upon these numbers, they're able to pinpoint more accurately player strengths and weaknesses. And then based upon these strengths and weaknesses, they are able to determine which plays to run and put their players in the best positions to succeed. On the flip side, the cons of using analytics is that a lot of times there's no context to these numbers. They say what happened, but not why it happened. And then stats can also be misleading at times. And then also they can also dehumanize players in the sense where if a coach or a general manager is overemphasizing the use of these numbers, right? And they're viewing these players strictly as a statistic, right? It dehumanizes the player as a person. And then also analytical technology is very expensive. And so, for some programs it runs up to 100,000 plus. And for, smaller schools or mid-major schools like UMBC, our budgets aren't that high and we cannot afford that type of technologies here. So in order to talk about the key disciplines in my study, I'm going to use the metaphor as if the disciplines are players with different strengths, right? And so management is like the point guard who sets up the play and decides which approach to take, whether an analytical or relational approach. And then you have the disciplines of statistics, information systems, and economics all working together to give me a quantitative tool to measuring player performance. And then right here on the right wing, you have Africana studies, sociology, and psychology, which all work together to help me determine the coaching behaviors of coaches and of players. So using these disciplines, I took an interdisciplinary approach, which is the combination of multiple disciplines to solve a problem that's too complex for just one single discipline. Under this interdisciplinary approach, I use Miller and Boyksman-Cia's integrative strategy of advancing through checks and balances, which is when multiple disciplines work together to keep each other intellectually honest. And so in this sense, I was balancing the relational coach-player relationships with the use of analytics and making sure that one was not overemphasizing the other. Furthermore, I saw that there's also a gap between what the experts view is effective or ineffective coaching. So a lot of the literature suggests that it's either a coach is effective or they're ineffective, but there's no in between. And so because of that, I used Repko's common ground strategy of transformation in order to put these two dichotomous terms onto a continuum with checkpoints of evaluation. And so these different checkpoints could include, does the coach have an expert level of knowledge of the sport? Do they understand the different psychosocial issues that influence their players? And do they use a balanced analytical approach where it's not 0 and it's not 100, but it's somewhere in the middle? And so through my research and through my experiences, I've learned so much about the importance of building that relationship with your coach, between coaches and players, about the use of analytics and the goods and the bads, and then also the psychosocial issues. But I want to continue this research well beyond my graduation, and it will only help me and benefit me. And so I want to continue studying possibly the use of drugs and alcohol in urban communities and the effect that has, and also how poor academic achievement affects urban youth as well. And then I also want to continue exploring and maybe using different types and more expensive types of analytical technology to see how what they compute differs from what the stats compute from the technology we use at UMBC, and see how we can continue using that to improve performance. And this right here is my bibliography slide. And that's it for me. Thank you guys for listening.